In the quaint and seemingly peaceful town of Tattersville, a series of chilling disappearances begins to shroud the community in fear. A haunting symbol surfaces at each disappearance, linking the victims to a chilling narrative of dread. At the heart of these mysteries is Alice, a seemingly ordinary girl with an extraordinary ability to communicate with an unseen entity named Simon. As Alice guides the town through its darkest corners, they uncover horrifying secrets and an eerie connection to a bygone era. Yet, even as they confront the horrors of the past, an unsettling question lingers. Can they truly escape the unseen echoes that haunt them? This tale of suspense and dread masterfully intertwines the threads of fear, trauma, and imagination, leaving readers questioning the nature of reality and the lurking shadows of the unseen. Tattersville, nestled in the heart of a desolate valley, was a paradox of its surroundings. The valley was a behemoth of rocky cliffs and sparse vegetation, ominous in its grandeur and threatening in its solitude. But within its grasp was the tranquil haven of Tattersville, a beacon of life in the stark wilderness. The town was dappled with ancient oak trees, their gnarled roots entwining the cobblestone streets like a living network of the past. A myriad of cottages, antique and humble, spread across the landscape, their whitewashed walls and thatched roofs radiating a bygone charm. At the heart of it was the town square, its stone fountain now a silent monument, surrounded by modest establishments. A blacksmith, a bakery, the mayor's office, and other vestiges of small-town life. Tattersville was a tight-knit community, a mosaic of generations that had woven their tales into the town's fabric. From the ever-diligent blacksmith to the jovial baker, the matronly schoolteacher to the steadfast mayor, every citizen held a vital thread. The social hierarchy was less of a ladder and more of a web, interconnected and balanced. Life was rhythmic in simplicity, defined by the cyclical patterns of agriculture, the town's economic backbone. The rising sun beckoned the townsfolk to their fields, and its descent was a siren call to rest. Festivals coincided with the harvest season, culminating in the fall fete, a revered tradition marked by music, mirth, and camaraderie. The onset of Tattersville's nightmare was as subtle as a serpent's slither. It began with whispers of unease, hushed conversations laced with worry about residents turning 35 mysteriously disappearing. It was a puzzle that gnawed at the town's tranquility, an anomaly in their predictable life. At first, it was believed to be a mere coincidence, the departures justified by plausible reasons, discontent, wanderlust, the allure of city life. But when the first body was found, a chill seeped into the town's marrow. Fear slithered into Tattersville, an unwelcome visitor in their idyllic life. The quiet town square echoed with foreboding. The once charming cottages seemed to shroud secrets, and the winding cobblestone streets were dread pathways. A veil of terror enshrouded Tattersville, replacing the tranquility with a sinister stillness. The disappearance of Hannah Lawson, a beloved schoolteacher, broke the initial serenity of Tattersville. A cornerstone of the local school, her passion for knowledge was second only to her devotion to her young daughter and widowed father. The last memory of Hannah was her gentle wave, a routine farewell to her pupils. Her home lay eerily undisturbed, dinner half prepared, a testament to a life abruptly interrupted. Less than a week later, George Kinnear, a successful grocer and father of two, vanished. An unmistakable figure in the town square. His jovial laughter echoed no more. He was last seen by his wife, leaving for his early morning supply run. His store was found untouched, goods laid out, awaiting their cheerful owner who never returned. Then there was Amelia Thatcher, a bookish spinster with a penchant for crosswords and crime novels. A creature of habit, her absence was noted when she failed to visit her daily library. Her modest dwelling spoke of solitude but not abandonment, her tea still warm, and her beloved cat, Mr. Whiskers, pining for his mistress. Amongst these innocents, the vanishing of Frank Dooley, the town drunk, was the most disquieting. A man of no fixed schedule or purpose, Frank's disappearance went unnoticed until his customary spot by the tavern lay vacant for several nights. His squalid apartment offered no further clues, the disorder a mirror of his chaotic life. The disappearances provoked a flurry of activity from the local police force, far from their routine duties. Initial theories swirled around voluntary departures or tragic accidents, but the absence of farewell notes, packed suitcases, or physical evidence muddied the waters of their investigations. Search operations were launched, and the woods and the outskirts were combed to no avail. The tight-knit community became the setting for an eerie ghost story, each disappearance amplifying the haunting dread. Amid this disarray, the authorities discovered a ghastly commonality, a chilling outline of a weeping willow tree etched onto the victim's skin. The drooping branches of the symbol twisted into a distorted crying face, the eeriness amplified by its placement on the stomach, almost as if marking a place of birth or creation. It was a stark emblem of sorrow, a silent testament to the victim's inexplicable fates. The symbol's origins were unknown, only adding to the enigma, its intricate design a paradox to the simplicity of the peaceful town. A cloud of foreboding hung over Tattersville. An undercurrent of fear crept through the cobblestone pathways, swept through the quaint cottages, and echoed in the rustling leaves of the towering oaks. The once harmonious community was now in the icy grip of an unexplained horror. The specter of the weeping willow symbol was etched not just on the victims but also in the collective psyche of the town, a grim reminder of the string of disappearances, a symbol of the creeping dread that now characterized their peaceful sanctuary. In the shadowy folds of Tattersville's growing terror, there was a peculiar paradox. Alice Marlowe. Alice was a 7-year-old childhood spectacle characterized by her unkempt chestnut curls and bespectacled, wide, curious eyes. Their cerulean hue held a flicker of innocent imagination, a world unseen by those around her. Her cherubic face bore a touch of natural solemnity, painting her as an old soul trapped in a young body. But beneath the simplicity of her demeanor existed a universe as vast as her imagination. Alice was not like the other children. While they played hopscotch under the bright sun, she would be found tucked away in the corner of her room, engrossed in conversations with her invisible companion. Her introverted nature often isolated her from her peers, but she never felt alone, thanks to Simon. He was her confidant, her playmate, and to some extent, her mentor. The Marlowe family was a pillar of the Tattersville community. Alice's father, David Marlowe, was a respected lawyer, a beacon of justice in the increasingly chaotic town. Emily Marlowe, her mother, was a homemaker and a nurturer who kept the home a sanctuary against the disquiet creeping into Tattersville. They were simple folk leading simple lives until their daughter's extraordinary imagination started to blur the lines between the innocent and the ominous. Alice's conversations with Simon were a source of intrigue. She described him as a man in his mid-30s, always obscured by shadows. The elusive figure was tall, dressed in a worn-out coat. His face, she said, was gentle and kind, etched with traces of sadness that intrigued Alice. Their relationship was profound. They'd share stories and partake in whispered conversations, and Simon would recite tales of his nocturnal escapades. Alice's descriptions of Simon were unsettlingly detailed. She spoke of his voice, smooth like a lullaby but underlined with an eerie echo. His eyes, she described, were unique, one a piercing blue like a frosty winter morning, the other a hauntingly hollow socket. But Alice never feared him. She was drawn to his mysterious persona, mesmerized by his enigmatic stories. Their bond was intimate and profound, akin to a strange friendship blooming in the wilderness of a haunted night. The initial indulgence that Alice's parents had shown towards her unseen companion waned as her tales became more elaborate. Their brows furrowed in concern as she spent hours lost in an alien world, oblivious to the terror that had gripped their town. The drawing she'd sketched with a childlike fervor bore an eerie resemblance to the unfolding horror. A peculiar symbol, a weeping willow, its branches shaping a crying face, was now an unwanted guest in their child's drawings. Amid the mundane rigidity of Tattersville's schooling, there existed a cordial relationship between Alice Marlowe and her schoolteacher, Miss Hawkins. An empathetic woman in her early 40s, Miss Hawkins had always been intrigued by the enigmatic 7-year-old, who preferred to color her world with the hues of her vibrant imagination rather than participate in the games and frivolities of her classmates. She had a soft spot for the quiet, bespectacled Alice, but it was an affection tinged with concern as she watched Alice's devotion to her unseen friend, Simon, intensify over time. Alice's daydreams started to bleed into her schoolwork, coloring it with an unsettling palette. Once filled with sunshine and daisies, her drawings started to bear ominous undertones. The sketches weren't ordinary crayon musings of a child. They bore a disturbing resemblance to the scenes playing out in the grim reality of Tattersville. Each stroke Alice put to paper seemed to echo the town's growing dread, turning her art into eerie prophecies of doom. Her drawings depicted chilling landscapes. Gloomy factories stood towering against the moonlit sky, the rusted iron gates seemingly whispering horror stories. Quiet streets were brought to life under the pallor of a dying moon, and empty houses stood witness to untold stories. But the symbol, an intricate representation of a weeping willow, its drooping branches forming a crying face, sent shivers down Miss Hawkins' spine. The symbol, etched crudely yet distinctly, mirrored the one that marked the victims of Tattersville's terrifying mystery. This chilling detail sealed the connection between Alice's art and the unfolding horror. The concern for Alice's eccentric behavior turned into alarm when she was found with a pendant that belonged to one of the victims. It was a simple silver locket, insignificant to the untrained eye, yet carried a sinister significance in the grim context of Tattersville. Alice was discovered with it after school, tucking it away in the inner pocket of her small coat, her innocent eyes betraying a glint of something inexplicably dark. When confronted, Alice's wide eyes filled with an unsettling calm. She recounted Simon giving it to her, claiming it was a token of friendship. Her words held an eerie innocence, a stark contrast to the ghastly implications of her possession. Alice's assertion about Simon's gift sent a frisson of fear through Miss Hawkins. The pendant, the symbol, the drawings. It was as if Alice was living a parallel reality, one that was leading the town deeper into its terror. The serene world of Alice Marlowe was taking on an ominous hue, her childhood innocence dipping its toes into the realm of the inexplicable. The peculiar sketches, the symbol of sorrow, and now a victim's pendant were no longer fragments of a child's imaginative play. As every parent's worst nightmare is the fear that their child could be in danger, for the Marlowes, that fear became a living, breathing entity, taking form in the innocuous guise of their daughter's invisible friend. Initially, Alice's tales of Simon were dismissed as a manifestation of her thriving imagination. What parent wouldn't indulge in their child's make-believe friend, after all? But as the sketchbook filled with macabre drawings and the silver pendant surfaced from Alice's innocent hands, their denial started to crumble under the weight of undeniable evidence. Alice's father, Thomas Marlowe, was a sturdy man, a pillar of strength in Tattersville's small community. He was a carpenter by trade, his hands well-versed in creating beautiful structures out of knotted wood. He loved his family fiercely, his protective instincts heightened by the creeping horror that was slowly enveloping their town. Alice's mother, Eleanor, was the heart of the Marlowe household. She was a schoolteacher, her nurturing nature enveloping Alice like a warm blanket. Yet even her inherent strength couldn't withstand the fear that was threatening to devour their family. Days turned into restless nights as worry crept into the Marlowe home, silently shrouding their existence. Hushed conversations in the dead of night became a routine, the silence of their quaint home punctuated by whispers of despair. With the tangible fear gripping their hearts, they watched their lively, innocent Alice retreat further into her world, a world where Simon was real, and his stories held ominous implications. Realizing their inability to unravel the mystery that Simon represented, they decided to seek professional help. Dr. Margaret Reed, a reputed child psychologist, was their beacon of hope in the unsettling darkness. Dr. Reed had built a solid reputation in the region for her ability to understand and connect with children going through emotional turmoil. She was a woman of quiet strength, her graying hair a testament to the years she'd spent navigating the complex labyrinth of the human mind. Yet, her eyes held a softness that comforted many anxious parents over the years. The Marlowes held their breath as they walked into Dr. Reed's office, clutching the hope that she might hold the key to their predicament. Their fear was palpable, their despair reflected in their haggard faces. As they laid Alice's case in front of her, Dr. Reed listened, her experienced eyes studying the parents and the sketched horrors they'd brought with them. A sense of foreboding colored Dr. Reed's first impressions of the case. The seemingly innocuous friendship between Alice and her invisible friend was evidently more complex and deeply intertwined with the gruesome reality unfolding in Tattersville. But what struck her the most was the symbol, a weeping willow weeping itself, an emblem of despair intricately drawn by the small hands of a 7-year-old. With each detail, Dr. Reed realized the enormity of the situation. But beneath the clinical assessment of Alice's case, another emotion was slowly stirring within her. A personal connection, a grief that had not entirely subsided. Her brother had been one of the victims, his life abruptly extinguished, leaving behind a grieving sister and a mystery. The chilling symbol that had marked her brother's death was now replicated in a child's drawings, linking her loss to her professional undertaking. As the Marlowes left her office that day, their faces etched with worry, Dr. Reed couldn't shake off the eerie chill that had taken root within her. She watched the retreating figures of the couple, their shoulders hunched under the weight of their fear, a fear that echoed her own, a fear that was a constant reminder of the grim shadow that had fallen over Tattersville. With the Marlowes' hope placed on her shoulders, Dr. Reed was ready to delve into the mystery of Alice Marlowe. Little did she know that the path she was about to tread was not just a professional endeavor, but a personal journey that would eventually lead her to confront the horror that had consumed her brother. Dr. Reed's professional veneer did not indicate the turmoil that churned within her. She was a study in composure, her demeanor embodying the calmness that was so essential to her profession. However, underneath the composed exterior was a woman battling an insidious fear. Alice Marlowe was her youngest client yet, with wide blue eyes that mirrored the innocence of her soul and a shy smile that barely showed her baby teeth. Alice was a stark contrast to the horror that enveloped her. The paradox was as chilling as it was fascinating, drawing Dr. Reed deeper into the case. The therapy sessions with Alice were a study of emotional endurance. Dr. Reed's approach was gentle, almost motherly. She carefully steered their conversations, her questions constructed to explore Alice's mind without triggering any traumatic response. On the other hand, Alice was a willing participant, her reactions varying from bubbly enthusiasm to thoughtful silence. She chattered about her school, her friends, and her favorite pastimes with the endearing earnestness of a child. When the conversations veered towards Simon, Alice's demeanor changed. Her usual vivacity would dwindle to a solemn silence, her large blue eyes taking on a distant, dreamy look. Simon, as Alice described him, was a tall figure shrouded in shadows, his form vague but his presence intense. He was her confidant, her friend in solitude, the invisible companion that filled her lonely hours with tales of sorrow and resentment. With each session, Dr. Reed spiraled further into a web of enigma. Alice's knowledge about the gruesome happenings was alarmingly detailed. The descriptions of Simon's life, loneliness, and vengeful feelings were disturbingly mature for a child of Alice's age. Alice painted a picture of Simon's world with words far beyond her years, her innocent voice often recounting tales filled with dark undertones. It was a chilling paradox that left Dr. Reed grappling with unnerving questions. The symbol, the weeping willow tree that wept itself, was an ominous presence in Alice's narrative. It appeared in her drawings, became a central theme in her conversations, and formed an inexplicable link to the murder victims. The symbol's presence was too prominent to be a mere coincidence, its intricate design far too complex to be conceived by a young mind. As the implications became increasingly terrifying, Dr. Reed felt the magnitude of her responsibility. Alice was not just in contact with an imaginary friend. The unseen Simon was more than a figment of a child's imagination. He was an entity, a spectral presence that carried the weight of a horrific past, a chilling symbol, and a vendetta against the town that had forgotten him. The case had ceased to be a routine investigation. It was a twisted puzzle with Alice as the central piece. The more Dr. Reed delved into the matter, the more she realized how intricately Alice was woven into the horror haunting Tattersville. The 7-year-old was the voice of a vengeful spirit, her innocent mind becoming the stage for a macabre drama. With each passing day, as the tranquil town of Tattersville shivered under unseen terror, Dr. Reed found herself in the eye of the storm. The victims were increasing, the fear was mounting, and Alice Marlowe, the girl with the endearing smile and an invisible friend named Simon, was in the middle of it all. A spectral shroud cloaked Simon's existence, a specter of sorrow with a tale anchored in the town's forgotten history. His story unfolded through Alice's young lips, pieced together like a haunting jigsaw puzzle. Alice spoke of Simon's past with an unnerving depth of understanding. She recounted his tales with the solemnity of an old soul trapped in a child's body. Simon was once a resident of Tattersville Orphanage, a bleak institution that was as much a part of the town's history as its quiet streets and charming facades. The orphanage, now a decrepit building overgrown with ivy and despair, was a scar on Tattersville's quaint charm, a stark reminder of its less idyllic past. Abandoned by fate and forgotten by society, Simon spent his childhood within the cold, impersonal walls of the orphanage. His tales echoed the loneliness that clung to the place like a ghostly shroud. The lack of warmth, the indifferent care, the hollow echoes of children's laughter devoid of true joy. Each fragment of his past was a testament to a childhood lost in the shadows. The pain of rejection was a recurrent theme in Simon's stories. The townsfolk, engrossed in their serene existence, remained oblivious to the despair brewing in the heart of their town. Festive seasons saw families rejoicing in their cozy homes, while the orphanage languished in its perennial gloom. These instances of ignorance morphed into resentment within Simon, a bitter seed that took root in his heart and continued to grow with each passing day. His resentment was not unjustified. The very town that had abandoned him was now reveling in a peaceful life, oblivious to the specter of sorrow haunting its periphery. The tales of neglect and rejection, of love, sought but never received, painted a somber picture of Simon's life, each stroke laden with a sadness far beyond Alice's tender years. Dr. Reed listened to these stories, her heart aching for the sorrowful ghost of a forgotten child. The connection between Simon's history and the current series of events was chillingly clear. The victims were all of an age that Simon would have been had he lived. The symbol, the weeping willow, seemed an embodiment of his lifelong sorrow. As the investigation progressed, it became apparent that some of the victims had historical connections to the orphanage. Some were descendants of the caregivers, some had parents who were on the board of trustees, and some were connected through a myriad of complex relationships. The haunting symbol on their bodies was a mark of vengeance, a chilling reminder of the sorrow they had inadvertently inherited. The past of Tattersville was unraveled, its idyllic facade revealing a forgotten chapter. The orphanage, its neglected inhabitants, and the town's indifference came together in a chilling narrative of revenge. The victims were not random. They were threads in a tapestry of retribution that Simon was weaving from beyond the grave. Alice Marlowe, the conduit of the town's spectral secret, became their beacon toward unveiling the larger narrative. In a trance-like state, her small, trembling finger pointed towards the forgotten edges of Tattersville, where a dilapidated structure loomed, untouched by time. It was an old factory, a relic from a time when the town had dabbled in industrial pursuits. Situated on the outskirts, the factory was a decrepit monstrosity, estranged from the rest of Tattersville like disowned kin. It was a rusting behemoth of bricks and iron, consumed by overgrown vines, the forgotten symbol of a failed endeavor. The imposing silhouette of the factory stood stark against the setting sun, its rusted iron gates groaning under the burden of years. Every inch of the sprawling edifice bore signs of abandonment, from the cracked windows to the decaying walls. Ivy snaked up the structure, a macabre decoration on a mausoleum of machines. The place was silent except for the occasional creaking of loose shutters in the wind and the distant hooting of an owl. The air was thick with an eerie stillness, the kind that precedes a storm. A sense of unease hung heavily in the atmosphere, creeping into their bones and making their skin prickle with trepidation. Cold spots lingered throughout the premises, ghostly fingerprints of an unseen presence. Shadows played tricks in the dim light, morphing into sinister silhouettes that seemed to watch their every move. Alice seemed different here, more connected, her eyes reflecting a profound understanding. Her face was pale yet determined. Dr. Reed held Alice's hand, her grip tight and comforting. Her heart pounded in her chest as they stepped over the threshold into the echoing vastness of the factory. The police officers trailed behind them, their hands on the weapons at their sides, eyes scanning the dark corners. As they ventured deeper into the labyrinthine factory, they discovered remnants of what it once was. A production hub filled with machines now frozen in eternal slumber. Dust lay thick on the surfaces, disturbed only by the footprints of rodents and, disturbingly, the occasional human-like imprint. "Alice," Dr. Reed said softly, "how did you know about this place?" "Simon." Alice's voice echoed in the hollow space, her eyes distant. "This is where he found solace, away from the pain." The significance of the discovery was preserved in them. The factory was not merely an abandoned structure, but a key piece of the puzzle, a chilling insight into Simon's world. This cold, desolate place was a haven to a spirit seeking revenge, a physical echo of his loneliness and resentment. The spectral presence of Simon permeated the cavernous factory, leading them toward a chilling revelation. As the group ventured further into the belly of the industrial beast, they were met with a horrifying tableau that made their blood curdle in their veins. Lying in a dim, forgotten corner of the factory was a row of preserved bodies, each one a haunting tableau of the missing townsfolk. They were laid out with unsettling precision, their eyes wide open in perpetual shock, bodies impeccably preserved as if in a grotesque mockery of sleep. Their skin had the pallor of the long dead, their mouths opened in silent screams, frozen in their final moments of terror. The macabre sight was a ghastly mirror of Alice's sketches, the eerie willow symbol etched onto each body in ghastly ink. The police officers choked back their revulsion, hardened by years of exposure to human cruelty. Dr. Reed turned away, clutching Alice to her side, trying to shield the young girl from the grim spectacle. The factory was no longer just an abandoned structure. It had transformed into a chilling mausoleum for Tattersville's stolen souls. Amid the horror, an old photograph caught Dr. Reed's eye. It was an innocent remnant of a time long past, a stark contrast to the terror surrounding them. The photograph depicted a group of children standing in front of a familiar building, the town's orphanage, looking less derelict in the faded image. One stood out among the young, hopeful faces, a dark-haired boy with soulful eyes, his face etched with pain too profound for his age. A scribbled note at the back read, "Simon and Friends, 1892. Recognition struck like a bolt of lightning. The spectral child Alice spoke of, the invisible friend guiding her hand, the entity tethered to the town, was the same boy in the photograph. The threads of past and present intertwined, painting a chilling portrait of a spirit born from the ashes of a tortured past, seeking vengeance for the sins committed within Tattersville's borders. The cycle of horror that unfolded in the town had its roots buried deep within the trauma endured by the orphanage children, personified in Simon's spectral presence. The revelation sent ripples of dread through the group. Alice and her parents returned to their home after the horrifying discovery. The next day started like any other in Tattersville, the rising sun painting streaks of orange and pink across the cloud-speckled sky as Alice Marlowe had breakfast with her parents. Despite the unsettling events that had been plaguing the town, Alice was cheerful. She chatted with her parents about her favorite cartoons and the drawings she planned to work on after school. Her mother kissed her goodbye as she boarded the school bus, with Alice waving enthusiastically from the window until her small figure disappeared around the corner. Little did they know it was the last time they would see Alice in their daily routine. When Alice didn't return from school at the usual hour, the initial reaction was one of mild concern. Maybe she was at a friend's house? Or perhaps the school bus was delayed. The clock ticked on, and with each passing minute, the worry grew, gnawing away at her parents' composure. As the daylight began to wane, the dread set in. The peaceful town of Tattersville was once again cloaked in the chilling embrace of fear. Alice's parents alerted the police, their panic spreading like wildfire throughout the tight-knit community. The horror of recent events came rushing back, fueling a desperate search operation that spanned the entire town and beyond. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers united in their quest to find Alice. They combed through local parks, the outskirts of the town, and every possible nook and cranny where a 7-year-old could hide or be concealed. Even the eerily abandoned factory was searched, each corner of its ominous structure inspected with bated breath, hoping against hope not to find Alice there. Amid the tumult, Alice's father found a drawing tucked into her sketchbook, forgotten in the haste of her usual mourning. His heart sank as he looked at the chilling portrayal, a stark contrast to the colorful landscapes she typically drew. It was a sketch of the weeping willow symbol, its branches extending to shape a crying face. But this time, the sketch had an added element. A small girl with curly hair, unmistakably Alice, held within the weeping branches of the tree. Underneath, Alice had written one word: sanctuary. The disturbing depiction ignited a frantic reevaluation of the search. Dr. Reed, aware of Simon's description of the factory as his sanctuary, urged the authorities to focus their search on the decrepit building once more. The eerie symbol in the sketch, the location it suggested, and the sudden disappearance of Alice formed a terrifying connection that sent shivers down the spine of every searcher. Preparation for confronting Simon's guardian was a tension-filled ordeal. The emotional state of the search party was frayed, a mix of apprehension, anger, and desperate hope. Dr. Reed was at the forefront. Her eyes hardened with resolve as she steered the group with an unspoken promise to bring Alice back. Alice's parents clung to each other, their faces a picture of fear and hope tangled into a maelstrom of emotions. The plan was simple yet fraught with unknown dangers. They would approach the factory under the cloak of nightfall, armed with flashlights and whatever makeshift weapons they could muster. Armed officers were at the ready, their uniforms a stark contrast to the quaint setting of Tattersville. They traversed the distance to the factory, the moonlight casting long, eerie shadows that danced with every rustle of the wind. As they approached the factory, its towering silhouette loomed in the darkness like a foreboding specter. Entering the forsaken building, they were met with a sudden drop in temperature, their breaths turning into puffs of fog in the cold air. The unseen whispers that echoed in its silence seemed louder, more urgent, sending shivers down their spines. Then, out of the shadows, a figure emerged. The guardian was a man, but his demeanor was not of this world. His eyes held an ageless quality. His skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones as if not having aged a day since Simon's time. His clothes were a mix of tattered period wear, looking oddly out of place in the modern setting. A hush fell over the group as if even the building held its breath. The initial encounter was a study of silent tension, each party sizing the other up. The guardian seemed unfazed, almost welcoming, his lips twisting into a cold, eerie smile. But then the stillness was broken by an officer stepping forward, the tension snapping like a taut wire. A conflict ensued, a desperate struggle in the flickering torchlight. The guardian fought with surprising strength, but the sheer numbers eventually subdued him. In a surge of adrenaline and desperation, Alice's father managed to land a decisive blow that knocked the guardian unconscious, ending the fight. In the aftermath of the conflict, they found Alice. She was huddled in a hidden room, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear but otherwise unharmed. Seeing her parents and Dr. Reed, she let out a sob, tears streaming down her face as relief washed over her. The room echoed with her sobs of relief, resonating with the sighs of those who had come to her rescue. Alice was immediately swaddled in warm blankets, her slight form shaking from the chill and the terror she had experienced. She clung to her parents, her tiny fingers clutching their clothes as if afraid they would disappear. As she was carried out of the factory, the first rays of dawn peeked over the horizon, casting a soft, hopeful light on the night's harrowing events. Alice's recovery was slow, a labyrinthine process of physical healing and psychological reconciliation. There was a change in her demeanor, a loss of innocence replaced by a grave maturity that sat heavily on her young shoulders. She had seen and experienced more than any child should, The echoing laughter of her carefree days was replaced with silence. Her once expressive eyes held an unspoken sadness. Yet, she was resilient, showing a quiet strength that left her parents in awe. Their little girl was slowly piecing herself back together, her love for drawing serving as an emotional outlet. As for her parents, the ordeal had aged them. Each wrinkle, each silver strand in their hair, was a testament to their endured worry. They too were healing. Their roles expanded from mere parents to pillars of support for their little girl navigating her trauma. Dinner tables were no longer for mundane chatter, but for conversations that mattered. Every night, they'd sit together, letting Alice guide them through her maze of emotions, offering their quiet understanding. Tattersville, once a quiet town with a foggy past, was now bound by a shared history of horror and resilience. The townsfolk treated their past differently, no longer shrouded in comfortable ignorance but with a grim acknowledgement. The abandoned factory was no longer a forgotten relic but a dark symbol of their past. The weeping willow a chilling reminder of the pain borne by their town. The events prompted a town-wide reflection on fear, trauma, and the power of imagination. The haunting tale of Simon's revenge and Alice's harrowing ordeal became a grim parable discussed in hushed tones. It begged the question, were the horrifying events the result of Alice's hyperactive imagination fueled by the town's forgotten history, or were they manifestations of something more sinister? One late autumn evening, as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in melancholic hues of orange and purple, Alice found herself drawn to the ancient willow again. Its sweeping branches swayed gently in the cool breeze, the rustle of leaves sounding eerily like whispered secrets. With her sketchbook in her lap, she began to draw. Not the scenes of a haunting past or the somber portraits of her imaginary friends, but the ethereal beauty of a dusklit Tattersville. Then, without any apparent reason, she stopped. Her wide eyes stared into the distance, fixated on something unseen. Her hand rose slowly, her little fingers splaying as if to touch something. Someone. "Simon," she whispered. The word hung in the chilling air, an echo of the haunting past. Her parents, watching from the porch, exchanged a glance of quiet horror. Yet Alice's face bore no trace of fear. Her gaze softened, and a small, knowing smile tugged at her lips. "Yes, I remember. The lullaby. You used to love it." Her voice trailed off into the twilight, her words sending an icy shiver down the spines of her parents. The innocence of a child's conversation with her imaginary friend now had a spine-chilling implication. There was no dread in Alice's eyes, just a calm acceptance, a strange maturity that children her age should not possess. As the night cloaked Tattersville, the haunting image of Alice smiling at an unseen presence under the willow tree was a chilling reminder. The unseen had not left Tattersville. The echoes of the past had not been completely silenced. And Alice was still listening. Alice was still seeing. Alice was still talking to Simon. As the moon took over the night sky, its pale light falling on Alice's serene face, the town of Tattersville fell into an uneasy sleep, cradling its chilling secrets under the blanket of silence and dread.